Ukraine is preparing for a major onslaught. It aims to take back the occupied territories and push Russia further back. Moscow, too, is deploying more firepower to the front lines. The Russia-Ukraine war is clearly heating up. And at this critical juncture, China throws its hat in the ring. Beijing wants to play the mediator. So how are things planning out? Well, on the ground, things are moving fast. 12 Ukrainian combat brigades with 48,000 troops are planning to push deep south into Russian-annexed Crimea. This was revealed in leaked documents from United States Pentagon. They are being armed with new military equipment, Western tanks and American armored personnel carriers. On the other hand, Russia too is preparing for its own offensive. It is infusing new troops on the front lines. Moscow plans to recruit 400,000 additional troops. Russian troops are relocating people from occupied areas near Kherson. Ukraine has begun evacuating citizens from Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine, which has seen heavy fighting in the past few weeks. The signs are ominous. A big battle is coming, as both Ukraine and Russia get ready for a fresh offensive. China has decided to step in. It hopes to replicate a deal like arch rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia. After its 12-point peace plan proposal in February and President Xi Jinping's Moscow visit in March, China now says it is sending a delegation to Ukraine. It aims at finding a political settlement to the conflict. And Kiev is optimistic now. In a first call since Russian invasion, Jinping and Zelensky held a telephonic conversation. The stage now has been set for a dialogue between Beijing and Kiev.
The Chinese side will send a special representative of the Chinese government on Eurasian affairs to visit Ukraine and other countries to conduct in-depth communication with all parties for a political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. On the issue of the Ukraine crisis, China has always stood on the side of peace, and its core position is to promote peace talks.
While Russia accuses Ukraine of undermining any peace attempts after Jinping's call to Zelensky, the West is watching developments closely, with the US and France hoping it would yield results. All right, for more on this, we have Glenn Dyson, who is a professor of international relations, University of Southeastern Norway. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you for having me on.
Glenn, the Russia-Ukraine war is poised to enter a new phase. And at this critical moment, how do you see China sending a delegation to Ukraine?
Well, China wants to be a mediator. It's currently on this peace offensive, if you will, trying to settle conflicts around the world. And also, China never really had any interest in a war in Europe. It wants to connect a lot of these countries who are now fighting into its Belt and Road Initiative. And the Ukraine may also soon be in need of a mediator as well to get an end to this war, because this spring offensive they're planning appears to be their last chance, and after that they probably have nothing more to give. But again, the role of China it depends, because if the Ukraine and the West are ready to negotiate and compromise, then I would say that China would be a likely partner, even possibly creating economic incentives for peace. The problem so far is that the United States and NATO has rejected a ceasefire and rejected negotiations in very clear terms. So they rather want to put pressure on Russia to effectively capitulate. And in my opinion, that would never happen, because from the Chinese perspective, if they defeat the Russians, then they will come after China next. So yes. I think the Chinese would rather supply weapons in that case than to put the pressure on Russia. So again, it depends on position.
Glenn, Zelensky has been averse to any kind of a sit down and talk, but he spoke to the Chinese president. Do you see this as a positive step forward?
It could be a positive step forward, because so far we're more than a war into this gruesome war, and there's still not any peace initiatives coming from the Western side. So far, China is the only one who has put forward a peace proposal. It was shut down very quickly by the United States. But I think that the Chinese position is positive, and also I think it's very positive because it represents also the position of the global South, which in large you can summarize as they're not being supportive of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, they also don't support this NATO proxy war against Russia, which is why they stay outside. They don't want to supply weapons or place sanctions, but they also don't want to condone what Russia has done. And I think this is a healthy opening position. And to be honest, I think we need outside mediation, because this is also a conflict between Russia and NATO. And if not China, which is a bit problematic because of their hostile relations with the US, ideally, a huge country like India would also come in and help to broker a peace between NATO and Russia, as well as Ukraine and Russia, for that sake.
Right. Glenn, India has already made its stance clear. It's not the era of war. And I also wanted to ask you that, do you feel China can replicate what it did between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Can it play mediator between Ukraine and Russia and bring them to peace?
Well, possibly, and again, there's no other option at the moment. And I think that what made China work so well in the Middle East is because they had an incentive for peace. They wanted to have close relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. That was only possible if you can create peace between them. And the Chinese have the same interest in Europe. They want to have good relations with both the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the other Europeans. So they have this economic incentive to do so. And so beyond China, I'm not sure who would be interested in a peace anymore. Again, I think India would be the only real alternative, possibly Brazil. But beyond this, there's no one else to broker a peace here.
Right. Thank you for all those updates, Glenn. Thank you for
my
joining.
pleasure.